My husband answers for me like I don't exist. It started so subtly I almost couldn't point to it at first. We'd been together 4 years before we got married, and for most of that time he just seemed confident. The kind of man who could carry a conversation anywhere. He was quick with people, always smiling, always ready with a story, always the one making waiters laugh and cashiers remember him. I used to think that was charming. Then maybe 3 or 4 months after the wedding, that charm shifted into something else. We'd be out somewhere and someone would ask me a question. Simple things. What I wanted to drink, how work was going, whether we had plans for the holidays, and before I could even open my mouth, he'd answer. She'll have the Sauvignon Blanc. She loves her job, don't let her complain to you. We're doing Thanksgiving with my family this year. It was always said casually, always with that easy grin, like he was helping move the conversation along. And because it was small, because people usually just laughed and kept talking, I kept telling myself not to make it weird, but it kept happening. I'm a speech therapist. I spend all day helping children find ways to use their own voices, and somehow I was coming home to a man who kept speaking over mine like it belonged to him. At first I tried to correct him lightly. If a server asked what I wanted and he jumped in, I'd smile and say, actually, I want the other one. If one of his friends asked how my week had been and he said, she had a rough one, she's been cranky, I'd laugh a little too hard and say, no, I'm just tired because I had back-to-back evaluations. He would act confused every single time, like I was making a correction where none was needed. I was just helping, he'd say later in the car, or, I know what you meant, or my favorite, why are you always looking for a problem? The thing was, it wasn't just random comments. There was a pattern to it. He answered questions about food, plans, money, my work, my family, my schedule, even my feelings. If someone asked whether I liked a movie, he'd say, she thought it was boring. If my mother called and asked whether I could come by Saturday, he'd shout from the kitchen, she's busy. If neighbors asked whether we were thinking about getting a dog, he'd laugh and say, she couldn't handle one. One Friday night, we were at dinner with my cousin Marisol and her husband. Marisol asked how my new school placement was going because she knew I'd switched clinics. Before I could answer, he took a sip of his beer and said, she's overwhelmed. It's a lot harder than she thought it would be. I just stared at him because that wasn't even true. The placement was hard, but I loved it. I had spent the whole drive there talking about how proud I was of one little boy who'd finally started using full sentences. Marisol looked at me, not him, and asked, are you overwhelmed? I said, no, I'm actually really happy there. He gave this short laugh and shook his head like I was being cute. You say that now, but last week you were exhausted. After that, I started noticing how often he did it at home too. I'd be on the phone with my sister, and if she asked whether we could come to her daughter's birthday party, he'd answer from across the room, we'll be there, even if we hadn't talked about it. If I was texting my friend Lauren about weekend plans, he'd glance over my shoulder and say, tell her probably not. If I was filling out forms online and paused on a question, he'd lean over and click the answer himself. One night at brunch with his coworkers, I tried to tell the story of how we met, and he cut in and told a completely different version. Everyone laughed. When I said that wasn't what happened, he squeezed my knee under the table just enough to shut me up. After that, something in me changed. I stopped brushing it off. I started writing it down, dates, places, what was said, what I was asked, what he answered. The list got long fast. What made it worse wasn't just how often he did it. It was how normal he acted after. No guilt, no apology. Just that same mildly irritated look, like I was slowing things down by wanting to speak for myself. The breaking point didn't happen all at once. It had already started building before the clinic event. One night, my supervisor hosted a small dinner for staff and their spouses. She asked if I wanted to apply for a certification program I had been seriously considering. I was ready to say yes, that I'd been thinking about it nonstop, that it could open up a specialty track I'd wanted for years. Before I could say anything, he laughed and said, she's not doing that. She gets stressed enough already. The table went quiet. I said, actually, I am thinking about it. He waved it off like it wasn't my decision to make. On the drive home, when I asked why he said that, he told me I was ruining the night. 2 days later at his parents' house, his sister asked me about my work. I started explaining, and he cut in again, answering for me, simplifying everything I said into something that wasn't even accurate. I said his name once. He kept talking. I said it again, louder. He finally turned to me like I was interrupting him. I told him to stop answering for me. The whole table went silent. He laughed it off and told me not to do this here. That sentence stayed with me. Like the problem was me saying something, not him doing it. So by the time the clinic open house happened, I was already at the edge. It was a big event. Parents, staff, referrals. Dana asked me to help present. This mattered to me. For the first half hour, everything was fine. I was answering questions, explaining therapy plans, doing my job. Then it started again. A parent asked me something technical. He stepped in and answered wrong. I corrected him. He laughed it off. Dana asked if I could lead the Q&A. I said yes. He laughed again. You sure? Like I couldn't handle it. Then came the moment. I was talking to a mother about her daughter's diagnosis. She was nervous, asking real questions. I was answering carefully, and he stepped in again, hand on my back. What she's trying to say is, that was it. I stepped away from him, looked at the mother. Let me answer that myself. Then I turned to him. Stop speaking for me. He smiled like I was overreacting. No. My voice cut through everything. You do this everywhere. Restaurants, my family, your family, my job. You don't let me speak. Everything went quiet. He stepped closer. This isn't the time. It is, I said, because apparently there's never a time you think I'm allowed to talk. He dropped his voice. You're causing a scene. You caused it, I said. You just expect me to stay quiet. Then he looked at Dana instead of me and said, sorry. She gets emotional. That was it. I looked at him and said, leave. He laughed. Over this? No, I said. Over all of it. He stared at me, waiting for me to back down. I didn't. Dana stepped in and told him it would be best if he gave me space. He muttered something and walked out. I didn't go home that night. I went to my friend Lauren's place with the bag I had already packed. He texted me twice that night, once asking if I was still upset, once asking if I'd embarrassed him on purpose. The next day he asked where the checkbook was, then if I'd paid the internet bill. Nothing about what happened, just logistics. I called a lawyer 2 days later. He signed the papers without much of a fight once he realized I wasn't coming back. The quiet after was the strangest part. No interruptions, no corrections. The first time someone asked me a question and I answered without anyone cutting in, it felt unfamiliar, then it felt normal again.